Hello, Rachel.
Hi, how are you?
Yeah, not bad. Where are you today?
I am in Brooklyn, New York. So it's
Fantastic.
3 p.m. here. Yeah, as Martin said, I was working in literary agencies for around 7 years in New York. I worked for a couple different agencies, um, but mostly at Dystel Goderich, which is now Dystel Goderich and Barrett. It was not when I was there. And I loved being an agent. I always wanted to work in publishing. My main goal was to work with books and to work with authors. And being in New York, publishing is really accessible since most of publishing is in New York. So it was a really fun opportunity for me. Agenting is where I fell into first, and it's what I stuck with. After some time, I realized I loved working with authors. I loved pitching their books, writing. Agents write their own pitch letters to editors. So the way you guys are writing query letters, I kind of did the same thing with pitch letters all of the time for my job. Like Martin said, this webinar is going to cover not only how to personalize your query letters, but why you have to do it. There's a lot of information out there on query letters, how to write them, what should be included, how to, winnow down your 90,000 word book into 300 words or 400 words. But you also need to add that personalization edit. Why do you have to do that? Why not just send out one query letter to everybody and be done with it? Just write one, work really hard on it, and just copy paste that out to every agent you can think of. If you do think about it, it is a little bit like marketing. If you were to write one thing to everybody, you're not really writing to any one person. That's something I like to always focus on with authors whose manuscripts that I edit or whose queries I offer advice on. If you guys have explored Reedsy at all, if you've looked for editors or you look for marketers or anything like that, you've probably seen, I'm going to be on this slide for a little bit, Martin. I had one more point to make. You've probably seen that question on the Reedsy form that you fill out, who's the audience for your book? A lot of times I get authors who leave that space blank. That's what's most of the time, because it is really intimidating, but it is something you have to think about. But other times I'll see answers like, my audience is readers, or my audience is women, or it's teens, or it's men over 35, or whatever it is. And those are absolutely categories of people, but they're so broad that you really have trouble marketing to that group of people because they're so disparate within women or obviously within readers. I imagine everybody watching today, you're probably readers or consider yourself readers. And even though we all say that, I bet none of us have identical tastes in reading. So that's really something you have to think about because agents are pretty much that way as well. And that's why it's really good. There's so many different kinds of writers. There's so many different kinds of readers. There's so many different kinds of agents. And they're interested in different books, different kinds of media. And so that's why you have to reach out to them in a personal way. That's just the very first point here. It's a simple idea, but it's a powerful idea. An agent who wants a good book is an agent who wants a good book that is good to them. You're not just indiscriminately blasting the entire publishing community with your manuscript. Like I said, a good book to one agent doesn't necessarily mean it's a book that another agent is interested in. And then we can move on. Exactly, right where you are, Martin. That's the right slide. In my time as an agent, I would see authors who had clearly spent so much time on their manuscripts. They'd worked hard. They've gone over several edits, several drafts, as you do when you're writing. And then when it comes to querying, it looks like they just threw something together that either didn't pitch their book well, but even if they put that together, they put the bare minimum of effort in actually selecting who they were querying. I'd get pitch letters all of the time that were for books that were things I was never interested in. And it was, agents have their interests listed all over the internet. It's not hard to find those out there, but apparently it is hard to choose them correctly. So if you're here, you probably already know that the query letter does matter, but you need more than just that well-written pitch to get an agent's attention. You do need to show this agent that you are being intentional in your querying and that you're reaching out to this agent for this book for this specific reason. So you're seeing that let that agent know you're particular about who you query. So why do you have to do that? The simple reasoning is just that plain marketing again. I think about promotion emails that you get in your inbox. Sometimes they'll say your name at the top, and even though it's a spam email from someplace that you bought one thing one time, you still pause just a half a second longer when it says your name at the top. Getting that pause from that agent is going to be the first step. This is going to sound super, super basic, but showing the agent that you care, that you put care into this letter, into researching agents and to landing upon them for this specific reason, no matter what that reason is, shows that not only are you committed, but that you'll probably put care into your work with them too. Because an agent is vetting you for your work, but they're also vetting you for being a business partner. How are you guys going to work together? Does this person actually put care into all of the steps of this process? Or are they just writing the book and sending it to me and thinking, great, now you do all of the work? It also shows personalizing your letter, looking for agents who are interested in the things that your book is about. It shows that you understand your book. You know what your book is about. You know who reads your book. You're not spamming every single agent out there just because they're a literary agent. They have literary agent as their job title. You said, great, have my book. That's not going to be the case for every single person. You know that you write, say, contemporary fiction, or that you write thrillers, or that you write historical romance. And this agent here has listed that as one of the things that they are interested in. We can move on to the next slide. So basically, personalization is important. We've covered that, but there are tons of ways to do it. We're going to start with the simplest, most obvious seeming thing, their name. So again, like I mentioned, those marketing emails that you get from Amazon or from Uber or from Target that say, hey, Rachel at the start, you're going to pause more. Well, actually, you guys probably would not pause if they started with all Rachel. Hey, Rachel, it would absolutely work on me, but actually it might turn you off unless your name is also Rachel. But even if you know it's just a mistake on someone else's end, on the sender's end, to address you by the wrong name, even if they spell your name wrong, you can say, okay, that was just a typo, that was a mistake, but it's still annoying. It still turns you off a little bit from whatever the rest of the email says. And I'm going out on a limb here to assume that you don't want an agent to be a little bit turned off before they read your pitch. Because the name is important. And beyond just getting it right, it's important to know that you should absolutely always use a name. A lot of agencies now, they'll use something called a query manager, which is not you writing a query letter and emailing it or sending it to a specific agent, but you're putting details in an online form. So even if you're using that, or even if you're sending to an email address that's submissions at X agency or queries at X agency, you should always use a specific name and know why you're choosing that specific name over any other agent at that website. So you're never going to want to address a query to whom it may concern, like you see there, or dear agent or agency, or dear sirs, or anything like that. That's going to make the agents on the other end have to try to figure out for you who you meant to send that to. And you don't want them to pick for you. Anytime that I got one of those generic queries as an agent, it always left me super unenthusiastic before I even began reading. And again, having the name correctly and putting the name there sounds really basic, and it is, but I think all of you would be shocked by the number of times I've received a generic agent query, or even worse, been copied on an email that literally was just a pasted query letter and me and 50 other agents in the copy line. At the agency, anytime one of those queries showed up, if it sounded really generic or if it didn't address us by name, we'd forward around to one another and ask, did anyone else receive this? Did you guys get this query letter? And anytime, three of us said, oh yeah, I got that this morning, someone would just reject it, because at that point you're thinking, well, they're not really doing their research. They're not reading our submission guidelines and saying submit to only one of us. They think all three of us would be good fits. You're not thinking about who here is the best fit for my agent, for my book. So it really just gets out of the inbox. As you can see here, I did the briefest of searches on Twitter, and I pulled up dozens and dozens of agents who feel the same way. This is just 3 here to illustrate how widespread the ignorance of this supposedly very basic, very obvious rule is. And you sort of think about it this way: when an agent has 50 or 100 or even 20, 15 queries in your inbox waiting to be read, and an agent gets a lot of queries every day, and an agent does a lot more than just read queries, sometimes you have to think of ways to weed out those authors at the top who don't really think that they care. So maybe there are agents who just don't read queries that aren't addressed to them. So I see your question here, Johanna. When it comes to addressing, should one use the agent's full name instead of Mr., Miss, or Mrs., especially if you don't know the latter is preferred one? Yes. Usually, honestly, full name is fine. To me, you could say, Dear Rachel. Even just that is okay. Dear Rachel Stout, Dear Ms. Stout, anything, any of those three is absolutely fine. Yeah, it's usually fine to just even use a first name or use the full name. That is absolutely fine. Okay, moving on to the next one. So now that you guys are out of the running for making the absolute worst mistakes, which is just getting the name right, which doesn't take that much care. To make an agent feel really, really targeted, you've got to show them that you put thought into targeting them, that they're not just any agent, they are the agent for your book. Because that is also something you want to be thinking about. This is a small side note here. But when you are querying, especially for the first time, I know it's really, really easy to get extremely excited by any interest that any agent shows you. And you absolutely should be. Any good feedback on your work is an accolade and is something to feel good about. But you do have to remember that it isn't just a flash in the pan connection that you're making for this agent right here, right now for this book. You do ideally want this to be a partnership that goes on for several years or for several books. And when this agent tells you their ideas for your book, you want to make sure that those ideas align with your ideas, because you want to make sure you guys have the same vision. And that's also going to come when you're researching agents. You're going to see, okay, this person likes my kind of book right now, but they also like, oh, they like that, which is also something I like, and I like this, and they like that. And there are other compatible interests there. At this moment, it does feel like the agent has all of the power, but you guys are benefiting equally. So do keep that in mind. You're not just any author, and they're not just any agent. You guys just really want to try to make sure you're finding that connection. So we're looking for ways to find that connection and to show that work in your query letter. And doing it well is actually really simple for the size of the effect that it can have. By the time you're querying an agent, you're probably already on the agency's website. So don't just skip over to that submissions tab. Don't just get on the website. You've got a name, so great. How do I query you? It's super tempting, but don't do it. Most websites are going to have an About Us section or an About Agent or Our Agent section or something very similar where you can read a little bit about the agent. And the most basic thing you're going to find is the bio on the company's website. They're likely going to have an Our Titles or Recent Book section as well. You can see if any titles on that website match any comp titles that you've chosen for your book. Or any titles that seem relevant to your book or that you just personally really enjoyed, and you want to reach out to the agent who represented that book and say, I loved this book that you represented. I'd love for you to be my agent too. So you're going to take that preliminary list that you got that name from. Maybe you got it from a big database. Maybe you just Googled all agents who represent thrillers, and you got 200 agents and you just have 200 names that you're working on. So even taking those names and going from to the website's bio, even if you just find their bio on the website, even if you just find a small, seemingly innocuous piece of information, like where they went to college or what kind of pizza they like, it depends on who they are, what they put in their bio. There's going to be something there that'll stick out to you if the match is good. Just getting that name isn't going to be enough. So I was going to give you an example from my experience, and you're going to wonder, you're going to realize why my bio has been up here on this website, on this slide for so long. I got a query one time from this author. I don't actually remember exactly what the book was about, but I do remember that on its face, it was not a book that I normally would have represented, that I normally would have been that interested in. And at first, I was thinking, all right, I'm probably going to reject this, but I'll read the query since, I have 10 minutes. And I thought this author wasn't, doing what I'm saying you should be doing, which is researching for the right agent and querying them selectively. But it turns out he actually was doing just that. He had clearly read my bio on the agency's website. Maybe he read a couple blog posts, I don't know. But all he needed was that one line that is highlighted there. He saw that I grew up in South Jersey, which I know there's at least one other person from New Jersey on this call. And I only learned since leaving New Jersey that no one outside of New Jersey specifies North or South Jersey, but it's very important to us. So I grew up there, and I've been living in Brooklyn for 10 years. The author learned this from one little line in my bio, very basic information, very accessible. You could all probably Google it now. And the one thing he emphasized in his letter was that his protagonist was also from South Jersey, which I really appreciated him calling out, and that he was currently living in Brooklyn. I got really excited when I saw that. He made a point to say, I know this is your background. This is also my protagonist's background. And I requested that book right away. Even though the book wasn't necessarily up my alley subject-wise, I thought, A, this author is taking time to show me why he's querying me, and B, I actually might feel more of a kinship with this protagonist given our backgrounds. Same way as when you see, your hometown or familiar place in you're from Central Jersey. All right, that's all right. You're in the middle there. We can be friends. Yeah, but when you see a hometown, or you see somewhere you've been or somewhere you're familiar with in the background of a movie or in a book that you're reading, it's always way more fun when you can visualize the setting and visualize what people are going through. So I was really excited to request it just based on that. Moving on, like I said, that piece of information was very easily Googleable about me. But agents are generally pretty public people, so it doesn't take a lot to learn just a little bit about them. Being active in the literary world does mean putting a lot of information out there in writing in a lot of places. So beyond the bios on those websites, these are just a few websites that I really like, and I really like to recommend to authors for where to find out those little pieces of information that you're going to make the connections with the agents on. The first here is Manuscript Wishlist, which is a little bit newer and which I really enjoy, particularly because this is something that the agents write themselves, and it's not on a company website. So they're not sort of tied to, do we have a particular voice that we use on the website, or we only say certain things in the bio or give certain pieces of information. On this website, agents can put whatever they want. Some of them, their real personalities will shine through. They'll get funny, they'll get silly. They might list the top 10 movies that they saw recently liked, and maybe one of your books is similar to that. They might just list the genres they're interested in, but usually they'll list really specific interests as well, which that's sort of like finding the needle in the haystack. But if you do happen to have a very specific book that an agent has specifically asked for, well, then you're kind of golden, and you can find those there. The next is Query Tracker, which is much more of a database kind of website, but it does give you the very basic information about almost all of the agents that you can think of. What I also really like is that Query Tracker has a little forum there where authors who are currently querying can give a little bit of information about those agents. So, if you queried an agent who everybody else says, oh, this agent gets back to authors right away. I queried them on Monday, I heard back by Friday, and everybody else kind of corroborates that. And you queried this agent 3 weeks ago, and you haven't heard back. Well, then you know that you can check in with that agent because maybe your query got lost, or maybe they're considering it for a different reason, or any sort of information like that is really helpful. Publishers Marketplace. This is another, this is both an industry website, and it's a website that authors can use as well. The accessible portion for authors, or for people not paying for subscription, basically, is a little bit like an agency website sometimes. Not all agents use it for that purpose, but a lot of agents do. And if you search agents on there, you'll be able to see genres they represent, as well as some self-written bios, maybe some books they want to call out as, their most representative book deals. So if you see this agent specifically says these 5 books are most representative of my interests, they're books that I have sold, then you can look to those books and say, is my book within that family? There is a paid portion as well, which I don't normally recommend to authors, but if you do want to do a really, really heavy research section for just 1 month, you can pay the $25 for 1 month and see. And if you think this will be helpful for you, if you don't do it. You can see what the book deals that are all the book deals are being reported on Publishers Marketplace, which can be helpful if you want to find who the agent was for a book. Though, hint, you can usually look in the acknowledgement section for a book, and they will usually thank their agent. So if there's a book on your comp titles list, or again, books you think share the same audience as yours, I would absolutely look in the acknowledgement sections there. But you can see all the book deals here. So you can see what books these agents are actually having success selling, as well as what they say they're interested in. And the last website is Writer's Digest, which is a great website. They have all different kinds of columns. I would absolutely sign up for their newsletter, which will give you new agent alerts, which will give you agents currently representing sci-fi or currently representing memoir. You'll get those in your email, and it's totally free. And I just think every author should sign up for it, even if you don't read it every day. And then the last thing is Twitter right here. So getting involved in the publishing community can be difficult, but observing it is very easy. All you have to do is on Twitter. Even if you don't want to use Twitter, even if you're not an active Twitter user, that is totally fine. You can just make an account, not put anything in it, and follow as many agents, editors, publishing houses, and publishing adjacent book people as possible. And you're going to kind of get a sense of what's going on in the publishing world, as well as who these people are on a day-to-day basis. So maybe your dream agent tweets something about their recent trip they took to Marrakesh, which just happens to be where your book is set. Well, then now you know this agent is recently interested in that setting, so you can just send them the book saying, I know, you really like this place, and that's where my book is set. Or the agent tweets out they really just want to read some women's fiction about a mom and a daughter taking a road trip together, and that's what your book is. You can write to them, and you can just come right out and say, I saw you put on Twitter that that you were interested in that kind of book. Duotrope, I've heard of it. I have not looked into it too much. So that is something that I'm actually going to make a note to look into. So I don't have an opinion for you now, unfortunately, but I'm literally making a note right now. You have made me interested. So basically, you don't need to know an agent's entire life story. You really just need to pick up on one little moment of connection that you can use that shows that you wrote to this agent, again, for a real reason. That's your golden ticket to at least getting a response of some kind. Telling an agent who's known to widely represent historical romance that the book you're submitting to them is historical romance is obviously good and obviously a great step. But if you can find out more, and I'm betting that you can for at least 75% of the agents that you're going to be querying, you absolutely should, and you should mention it. I always say myself up here, it's extremely light, totally acceptable stalking. I think every agent who puts that information out there in a public place, don't cross the line, is expecting you to read it and is expecting you to sort of be combing it and seeing if you're making that connection there. Moving on. So at this point, following all of this, following all of those websites and newsletters, you're going to get yourself a list of agents that you're really excited about. Some of them may be represented books that you've admired, or they have similar audiences to your manuscript. Some may have expressed an interest in the kind of protagonist your book has. These are other things that you can look for. It's not just genre. Maybe they like the kind of protagonist you have. Or maybe they say they like books told in a dual perspective or in stream of conscious or whatever it is that you're writing. Or they like multi-generational stories or books set in a certain era. Whatever it is, you found those keywords and you found those connections. And you want to make sure that the agent knows about that in your letter. So how do you do it? Unfortunately, there is no direct answer here. You can research it to your heart's content. I've asked people, I've done my own personal experience. There's no conclusive answer here. It's usually one of two things. One, you're going to start by telling the agent why you're querying them. And the second option is to include it in what I like to call the nuts and bolts paragraph at the end. So that's where you're going to be putting your word count, your genre, who you are. All of that stuff usually comes in one paragraph at the end, and you can put in why you're querying that agent. Both have pros and cons. I personally prefer keeping it to the end, but that's only because I like to start off the book, your query, right with the pitch. I like to bring that agent into the world immediately, get them interested in your story, and then tell them who you are and why you're querying them and all of that. However, if you have one really specific, extremely applicable piece of information, like I said, that authors whose protagonists are the same background as mine, or if you read on someone's manuscript wish list, or you read on their bio that they're looking for a very specific book and yours really fits right into that, then just start out right with that, because then you're going to get that agent excited about your book and getting that agent excited about reading what the book is about. The one thing you want to make sure you're always doing is, no matter which format you choose, whether you're starting with that personalization or you're putting it closer to the end, is you want to always follow submission guidelines. So like I said, there isn't any set one way to do it, except for the agents who are particular about it. There will be some agents who will say, I want your query letter in this format, I want it in this order, or here's something specific that I want in your query letter. Make sure you do that. It's its own kind of personalization following submission guidelines. And though most agencies have similar guidelines, they all vary depending, even if it's the length of sample they want to receive or how they want the subject line formatted of the email. Think about that as an element of personalization, of following what this agent wants you to do. The only other thing I want to make sure to bring up is that you want to keep your pitch intact. So put the personalization at the top or put it at the bottom. Keep the pitch for the book all together. Don't stick the personalization in the middle. Don't say, here's the part that I thought you might really like, or whatever it is. If you do that, and if you're following the submission guidelines, you're probably doing it okay. I just always want to bring this up because that's always a question of how do I inject the personalization into the query letter. Moving on. So beyond those specific lines of here's why I'm querying you, there are other subtler ways to tailor your query letter to a specific agent. So there are here's the coming out and saying, you like this, my book is this, that's why I'm sending it to you. But there are other ways to sort of subtly kind of push that letter in the agent's direction. I always like to remind authors that no book is about any one thing. You can pick any book and 3 people will describe it differently, even though they've all read the book. So there's never any one keyword or topic that you have to stick to when you're researching and querying agents. Maybe you stick with the World War II angle for a while and you Google that, and then you move to the romance aspect as part of your book, and you look towards that. A book can be about this stuff I just came up with for one book. It could be about a father-son relationship and sailing and the Florida Keys and aging. Could all be the same book, and those are all equally predominant elements of the book that you could pitch to somebody. So right there, you've got 4 topics to research and consider. Those are 4 things that become a focal point of a query letter that you're writing. It doesn't mean that you have to write 4 different query letters, because I know query letter writing is already hard. The baseline pitch for your book can remain the same, just as your book remains the same, but you can introduce it through 4 different lenses, just as the same way your book can be read through different lenses. So it's that hook, that opening paragraph, that can change per agent if you're changing the way you're pitching your book. If it sounds confusing, I do have one more real life example from a query letter that I did once receive, which is on the next slide. This novel up here was at its core what I like to call a rock star romance, which is the kind of book where there's a romance with a rock star, which is totally fun to read and totally fine, but it is not an interest that I as an agent like to represent. Also something good to note, you can enjoy a book and not be good at selling that book. And that was exactly how the book was pitched. It was pitched as a rock star romance. And I know that, but it was not pitched to me. I know it was pitched that way because the author initially pitched a colleague of mine who showed me the query letter after the submission was brought up in conversation. We were talking about it. The colleague was on the fence. Do I go with this author? Do I not go with this author? In the end, ended up passing on the book, but said that it wasn't that the book didn't have merit, just wasn't up her alley. So said that she could query a different agent at the agency. If you haven't guessed by now, that agent was me. But the query that I received from her was different than the one that I'd seen on my colleague's desk. It was not a totally different letter. It was just a letter framed differently. Instead of focusing on the rock and roll and the romance with the rock star that did play a huge role in the book, the author emphasized a different element that hadn't shown up in the other query letter. The author brought up this book is about this possibly magic, possibly science experiment gone wrong that instigates the romance possibly in the first place. And it is continued throughout the book. And if there's one thing that I have written about and made clear in the past that I am interested in, it is that tiny inclusion of a bit of magic or suspension of disbelief in an otherwise totally normal and realistic plot. So that's the element that's kicker for me. That author clearly read that about me and said, all right, I've gotten a semi-positive response from this agent's colleague. I want to query her. What does she like that's different from what the other agent likes? And I ended up signing her up. I got her a 2-book deal. That's the first book there. So it was definitely a successful story. Your book can be portrayed. I'm going to have a sip of water here. Your book can be portrayed in so many different ways. So just start thinking about that. Once you sort of get those different angles from your book, the things that are equally prevalent, don't make something up, don't force it. If one scene has a dog in it and you find an agent who's a dog lover, don't say my book is about dogs. But if it is something that is definitely viable for different ways for your book to be read, for different interests to be met, think about those and query those different angles, because you will find that opens up an entirely different cast of agents that you hadn't even thought of before. Moving along. So at this point, You might be thinking that that sounds like a lot of work, Googling every single agent, spending time on every single agent to see what this specific thing you can reach out for them, reach out to them about is, what guarantee do I have that that this agent is going to read the slush pile? Anyway, the slush pile is, if you don't know, that's what a lot of agents will call unsolicited manuscripts. So you maybe believe that you have to know an agent or be friends of a friend or a friend with an agent to get their attention, or you have to have published dozens of stories or have articles in literary magazines and journals to have an agent come to you to even have a chance. Actually, side note, if you are writing fiction, you do not worry if you've not published in the past, if you've not had any previous short stories or novels put out there. Novelists come from everywhere. And actually, as another part in this survey, which I'm going to talk about here, I did ask agents if that was important to them, and almost 75% of them said that it was not important that a novelist had published in the past. It's more about this book right here, right now. I know it's a little to the side here, but I do like to mention it because people always ask. But I did take it upon myself to survey over 20 different agents from some of the top New York agencies. Some were agents who have been in the game for 2 years, some have been in the game for 25 years. It was a whole range of agents from all different agencies. So that authors can see, this is really something I just like to do to put authors' minds at ease, can see that not only how important querying is and querying correctly is, but that every single person does get a shot. Agents want queries. They want to sign up new authors. They want to be the first person to find a new book that they get to be the one to represent, to sell, to be behind. Some of the results here that I just want to illustrate is that 95% of the agents that I queried said they're open to slush. So that's going to happen to most. Some agents close for a period of time to slush, but that's just because they get a lot of queries they need to catch up with. But you should always, keep checking in to see if they're open again. And 66% of agents are reading this slush several times a week or more. And I also know that authors don't always think that agents read their queries. Almost everybody reads them. And my favorite statistic, which is the one that I always want to tell people, is that 35% of the agents that I queried and now said that more than half of their current list comes directly from the slush pile. So in other words, it was by far the biggest source of leads for a whole third of these agents, and that the other agents, they didn't say that more than half did, but they said that portions of their list did come from the slush pile as well. And that goes for the new guys. It goes for the older ones. I've seen agents in all levels of success and all levels of having, been in the game for decades or for 2 years. Everybody's looking at the slush pile. Everybody's signing authors up through there. So also don't get intimidated by, an agent who has, 25 years of experience and they have 17 bestsellers to their name and you've read them all and you admire them all. Don't think I can't query that person because they're too big or they're too good. Everybody's fair game. If they're open to queries, they're open to you. And then for the last slide, it just means that your query is getting read and that you should pay real attention to that letter that you're sending. Make sure it's effective and tailored to every agent as much as it can be. Your query letter is your first impression. Your book may be super amazing. It could be the next big thing. But an agent's got to get past the query letter to know that. The point of the query letter is to get the agent to read the book. Once you've done that, then your work speaks for itself. And a personalized query letter is the way to get the agent to read those words that you've spent so much time working on. And like I said, there are all different things that you can think about to make the connection with the agent on. It could be focusing on tone, it could be focusing on writing style, your protagonist, your setting, your story arc, your pacing. Maybe an agent just says they like fast-paced novels. That happens all the time. Maybe it's some weird esoteric interest that you've hit upon. Anything that you're finding, if you found that match, you found that connection, you just want to make sure you put it in your letter and you show your work there.
Thank you so much, Rachel, for joining us today. It's been really great. Folks, one of the things we do at Reedsy, and I believe Rachel does as well, query letter reviews. So if you need a professional to help you out, just take a look at the query letter you've got. They probably won't write it from scratch for you, but if you have something in place, they could certainly help you polish it. Just head to reedsy.com, or if you want to check out Rachel's profile, that's reedsy.com/Rachel-Stout. And you'll be able to have a look at the great work she's been doing and ask her for a quote. Have a great day, rest of you.
Bye.
Bye.